Next on Newton Newsmakers, it's been a little over a year since Setti was sworn into office as mayor of the city of Newton. Well, the mayor now has his sights set on the United States Senate. So what does this mean for our city? Well, we'll talk with four political activists with differing opinions, one of whom just happens to be the publisher of the local newspaper. It's the topic of conversation across the city of Newton, and for the next 30 minutes, it's our topic of conversation, right here on Newton Newsmakers.
Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you.
Hi and welcome to Newton Newsmakers. I'm Charlie Shapiro. He's been dubbed Newton's political rock star by the editor of the Newton Tab. Setti is a Newton native who went from high school class president to mayor of Newton with stops along the way at Senator John Kerry's office, the White House, FEMA, and a year of military service in Iraq. And now the word is out that Mayor Warren has his sights set on becoming Senator Warren. It's the topic being talked about across the city of Newton. There's no shortage of opinions, including around this table. So how does this affect the city of Newton? We will ask our panel that is joining us today. Jeff Seideman is a community activist and former candidate for Alderman. Jeff is president of Image Tech Communications. He's an adjunct professor of communications at Mass Bay Community College, and his latest project is as the founder of the nonprofit Second Life Computers, which is opening up an office inside the Boys and Girls Club in Newton, and we'll talk to him about that as well. Gloria Gavris is a resident of Chestnut Hill and has been actively involved in a number of community-oriented efforts, including as an executive committee member of the Chestnut Hill Association, as well as a member of the Newton Economic Development Committee. Gloria is an attorney and follows the local, regional, and national political scene very closely. She's also a member of the City of Newton's Republican City Committee. Colleen Minaker is also a Newton resident, a former director of the Newton Conservators. She's a fiscal conservative and is concerned about the financial stability of our city. And like our other guests today, Colleen is a frequent contributor to the Newton Tab's online blog. And Greg Reibman is the publisher of over 100 community newspapers, including Newton's Tab and its online component, wickedlocalnewton.com. Under Greg's leadership, the Wicked Local Newton website and blog has become one of the most successful of its kind. Greg is a Newton resident and therefore obviously has a personal stake in what happens here in the city, as well as a professional one as publisher of the Tab. So hopefully I got basically everybody's, we're on track with that. So let's start off with you, Greg. Did this announcement of Setti Warren being interested in the senatorial position come as a surprise to you or anybody else for that matter?
I don't know if it was, I think the timing was a surprise because it seems pretty clear that Governor Patrick is the guy who let the cat out of the bag, and he did it twice. Twice he said essentially that the mayor was running before the mayor seemed to be ready to say that. And in fact, it was originally leaked back about October. It seemed to be coming from other Democrats suggesting that he'd be a candidate. So surprise on the timing. I don't think he expected last week when it happened that he really would be kind of forced to say then and acknowledge that he was considering it, though clearly he's been thinking about it.
Okay, so not a real shock.
Well, the timing's a shock. The fact that he's thinking about it, you think about it, if your governor is asking you to consider this, and consider that probably other prominent Democrats are asking you to think about this, maybe even President Obama has asked him to think about it because he's met with the president as recently as a few weeks ago, and he's a couple of times. If you're president, you're governor, others are saying you should think about running, you think you got to think about it.
I was totally surprised when Greg first put it out on the blog. What was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? I was startled. I thought, oh, no way he could do that. Of course, I did change my mind fairly quickly, but I was really surprised.
Jeff, what's your feeling?
If you look back at the blog when he was running, that was I wouldn't quite call it a knock, but that was a concern that he'd get elected, and this was just a stepping stone. And the reason why is because he's such an attractive candidate. Whether or not he succeeds or not, he's got all the charm, he's got the smarts, he's got the resume, worked in the White House, worked for Kerry. He's going places. I still believe he's going places. The only question is as to whether it'll be with this election or this is really a stepping stone, a way of getting his name out statewide for a follow-up race in, I don't know, lieutenant governor or maybe when Kerry himself gives up his seat.
Well, I think we can all stipulate that there's no surprise that he's seeking higher office, and that has always been on his mindset. And although I was shocked when the blog posted it, I think it was around 10:30 that evening, I was checking it out. I was like, whoa, he's already, it's already on his radar. However, my concern is not whether I don't think he will win. I think this is Scott Brown's seat. I think Scott has done a great...
And it's not the people's seat?
Yes, it is the people's seat. Right now it is the Senator Brown seat. And I think Senator Brown has done a great job being a Republican from Massachusetts and appealing to both independents, unenrolled, conservative Dems, and Republicans alike. But with that being said, relative to what it impacts with Newton, my concern is that he's going to serve two masters. I don't think he can run for election for the U.S. Senate and be an effective mayor. And my concern would be that he make a decision fairly soon, whether that's a 30 or 60-day window, of what his intention is for this city, so that the budget and City Hall and our residents can decide, where is his allegiance? Every phone call he takes from the press yesterday, today, and tomorrow is diverting his attention away from the city and the issues that he ran on.
I think most people would agree that he's an attractive candidate. He has all the components of an attractive candidate, and has proven that he knows how to campaign and be successful in what he has attempted to do so far.
I think he can do both. I do.
Okay.
I don't think running the city is that difficult.
Oh, I don't.
When he starts the latter part of his run, it'll be much more difficult. But for the next year, I don't see that it's that.
It's going to be a pretty crowded field, or even a field of some significant competition. He's going to have to start. Anybody's going to have to start pretty early.
Regardless of how many are in the field, there potentially will be a primary that Setti would have to compete in. And that's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of fundraising, lots of phone calls, and basically taking him outside of the city limits to campaign, to Western Mass, Cape Cod. I mean, to really move around and shake a lot of hands and knock on a lot of doors, as he's accustomed to doing.
Let me just ask a specific question, and let's start with Jeff on this one. When Setti was running for mayor, the actual question came up whether this was the job he really wanted, or was it in fact a resume building stepping stone? How does this affect that perception at this point?
Well, it's as I said earlier, that was known to be the issue. If Ruth got elected at her age, this was her final office. If he got elected, this was a stepping stone on his way up. I think the real issue here, as it affects Newton, is one thing and one thing only. Are we going to get the contracts settled with all of our unions, which are going to be sustainable and move the city forward? And he's got to make a choice as to whether he's on the side of the unions, which means he wants this union statewide support, or he's on the side of the public and he wants to solve the problem that he's promised to do. And if he does, I think he'll be even a bigger, stronger candidate. But he's got to make that choice. And it's hard to turn his back, what will be perceived to be turning his back on the unions.
I think the union's not the only issue, too. I believe that the city is going to need an override. But he can't be running as the guy who raised taxes in Newton. He's already going to be in trouble when he's the guy who raised fees in Newton. And we saw it in the Herald today, where there was a column by Holly Robichaud who was talking about what Setti Warren would be like. The liberal guy who's in favor of higher taxes. That's the Republican spin already against him when he becomes a candidate.
And if he doesn't do it and couldn't get the contracts settled at a favorable rate. And if he can't do that in Newton, what's he going to do at the Senate level?
So basically, we actually don't know what those collective bargaining results will be at exactly the time right now where we are talking about being $8 million in the hole.
Well, but the contracts,
school and the rest.
The teachers, as long as they drag their feet, they're operating under the old advantageous contract for them. Sooner or later, someone's got to say, this is it, and we're at an impasse.
Well, Colleen, this brings up your point a little while ago. You said that he can do both, and it seems like it makes sense that he can do both. And one of your comments that you made on one of the blogs at the tab was, go ahead and do it. What's the problem? And regardless of whether you would or would not vote for him, when you talk about him doing both jobs, do you see that as a plus for the city of Newton, or do you see that as a distraction from the work of the mayor?
I tend to think he can do both, especially this year. Once the primary gets closer next year, then it'll be much tighter. But even by that time, the budget next year we'll be done. You know, I think he can do both. I think he's got the flexibility of time, and there are so many components in the city that look after each entity. I mean, the school committee, they're basically doing the negotiating for that.
Well, he's on the school committee.
Right, but they're doing it. I mean, there are people on the school committee that are doing the negotiating.
Right.
So, I mean, he's the guy that's overseeing things. He delegates. He chooses people to take on certain roles, but he doesn't. As I say, he's got flexibility of time. He can decide where he's going to show up and when. And if he has to show up somewhere in Newton for something critical, he can be there.
Well, Colleen, what happens when you start getting those invitations from someone to speak at your group, and it's the same night you're supposed to be sitting on a school committee meeting? Or, you know,
Well,
there will
I
be
don't
those
think
conflicts.
I don't think that's a big problem, generally speaking. Now, if it were at a time where it was really critical, then it could be a problem.
So you don't care that he's not, that our elected mayor isn't on every school committee meeting, or most
No.
of them? Doesn't
No.
matter.
My
No.
concern that, you know, Mayor Warren may make different decisions than candidate Warren. And
Well, that's a possibility.
And there
That's a
lies, I think
possibility.
there lies the tension, and there lies that difficult balance that he's going to have to walk between. Because I do think in some instances those are two different decisions for his political gain, both at home and across the state. And I think at a certain point, pressure may be put on the mayor to make a decision. Are you going to stay as mayor? Are you taking up too much time?
He's running, and that's it. The question is whether he'll be able to take care of business at home, and that's a matter of his deciding. Again, as I said, there's only one issue that I see, which is the whole thing of the contracts. And if he can do that, everyone will love him here. He'll have some difficulty with the unions, but he'll get on. If he doesn't do that, he'll get this sort of typical union support because he didn't annoy them, and but he won't be the citizen hero that he could be if he solves the problem.
I don't know, everyone thinks the train has already left the station and, candidate Warren is, already getting bumper stickers made, perhaps already out there. I'm not necessarily wedded to that idea yet. I think there is still a decision that he and his family are making if this is a race that he really wants to jump into. I mean, Senator Brown, sitting incumbent, extremely popular, probably one of the most popular politicians and elected officials in this state.
With about $7.5 million.
$7.5 million in his war chest.
Oh,
And he's looking at a Congressman Capuano that had a great campaign and lost out in a primary, who, why isn't he jumping into this race and looking at it, who has a healthy,
I don't think-
treasury as well.
I don't think that
So-
Setti will even get through the primaries, but I
So-
think he's running, and he's got there's no downside to him for running as long as he solves the problem.
I think there's a lot of
back home.
political capital and goodwill in the city.
I
As
think
long
he's
as he
run.
solves the problem at home.
I think he's hedging his bets, and that's why he's going to stay in and do both for a while. And then if it appeared, say that there was some polling that showed that he had a good, solid lead, and that he was going to really throw himself into the race closer to the end, I would say then he might resign. But I would say he's going to keep both balls going.
I don't see him resigning. And nor would I want him to resign. I don't think
No,
that's
but
what
I'm
he
just
should
saying
do.
if it got close to the
It
end.
doesn't matter.
and he-
If he's in it, he's in it, and we live with the dual personality, and we decide whether we're happy with that or not.
And
I think he can do it.
We'll have
He's
Scott Lennon as mayor.
Well, actually, that would only, according to the charter, he shall devote full time to the office and shall not hold any other elective public office, nor actively engage in any other business, occupation, or profession during his term as mayor. And that's right out of the charter. You could very easily say that running for another office is not technically a job. At the same time, there are people on Greg's blog, for example, at the Tab, that strongly disagree with that. And as a matter of fact, I think that the editor of the Tab, Gail Spector, in one of her entries, one of her commentaries, was that she was wondering whether he really could do both.
Well, I think we're all wondering whether you can do both. Whether someone's going to challenge this or not, which would, I think, be the only way it would come to a head if someone wanted to go to court and say he can't do this because it's two jobs. I think that's a big
Running
question.
for office in the days when that was written was not such a big job, and it's still not technically a job.
Why are people so upset about this then? Because so far it's actually been a fairly positive conversation. Everybody thinks he's a good guy. Everybody thinks he can do the job. Most people seem to think, well, generally, at least a couple of us think that he could do both jobs, running and actually running the city at the same time. Where's the
Well,
problem?
the honeymoon is over. I mean, either way, it's like, oh, you don't like us that much?
Right.
There's that sort of personal,
think people
touchy-feely
are
thing.
surprised.
But, I mean, what really happened here is, and why I think what happened last week is so significant, is that we actually saw people speaking out and saying, expressing reservations about him, and they really hadn't been for the first 14 months. So no matter what, now we have detractors, now we have people who are uncomfortable with this, people, and it's inevitable in any political career that your honeymoon ends, and I think his ended last week. Doesn't mean people still don't like him, doesn't mean he's still not doing a good job. It's just that the dynamic has changed 14 months in.
When do we want to see results?
Well, and that brings up a good point. The ramifications for Newton, you would think that you would come into a position, whatever that position may be, you would have tangible results, tangible success stories, and you would build upon that and run for another office if that's what your interest is. I think, does anybody disagree that Setti has had some tangible success, at least in terms of going out, meeting with the public, and from a marketing perspective, restoring a certain amount of trust and faith and transparency, at least with the budget and the numbers and all of that? I mean,
He's doing a good job building his brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we were all waiting for the ultimate test was the budget.
Right.
We were waiting for
And
the
we're
budget
still
because then
waiting.
we're going to see if the guy who's been telling us for 2 years, or as long as he's been a candidate, I'm going to make hard choices. We're still waiting for him to make the hard choices. It's
Right.
going to be a little harder to sell now given the current events.
well, the tough choice wasn't supposed to be whether he was going to run for Senate or not. The tough choice was, what do we do with the difficulties that we have in the city of Newton and how we move forward that? Does this basically put some of those tough choices on hold?
Maybe.
Maybe I hope not. I'm urging him. I spoke to him at one of his meetings at the Ward School, and I raised the issue of, are you going to declare an impasse? And he says that's something under consideration. This is really where the rubber hits the road. 80% of our expenses in the city are people expenses, their compensation, their benefits, et cetera. They're all in the union contracts. All of the contracts follow the teacher contract. If he solves that, if he satisfies that with a sustainable contract, all the other problems go away. He gets the money, he doesn't have any layoffs, he can spend money to do other things that benefit and make people happy, or he could not. And so far, we're waiting. I like the guy. I tell my students to go see him because they're going to be telling their grandchildren about him. I'm a big booster of him, but he's got to do it. He's got to make it happen.
How do you think candidate Warren is going to make those tough, unpopular decisions at the expense of losing endorsements, votes, on the other hand?
It's a balance. Are you going to be the folk hero for making the hard choices in this difficult economic times, or are you going to satisfy the unions? I am real unhappy with the power that the unions have in this state, but that's a legitimate political decision to make. I think that Scott Brown, I think he's unbeatable. Mm-hmm. I think he's going to win anyway. But if Setti wants to set himself up, particularly for the next run, he needs to do the right thing, and that's to play hardball.
But I think you could win this Democratic nomination without overwhelming union support, just by virtue of how split it's going to be. There's a lot of things that are going to be split, though, because Alan Casey and Mayor Warren will certainly split the sort of liberal Boston-Newton urban suburban vote. And the North Shore goes one way, and who knows who else is in it. So that could be divided a lot of ways. That the union vote may not be the only factor here. You've got a woman on the North Shore, so she get the woman vote. There's lots of ways it could happen.
Is there any benefit, Greg, on Setti being elected senator?
Not any more different than Barney Frank. We take a little pride. You do this. Maybe somebody wants to drive by his house. But
I think
beyond that, I don't think it makes a lot of difference.
I think the Newton souvenir business you'll have little cup and saucers with his picture on it, just like in England you have the royals and all the dishes.
So this is
there.
the map to the where did they start here?
Right,
Political
there'll be a
stars
sign that
homes.
says,
Is that what you're
home of Setti Warren, senator.
It's different if everyone thinks if he is indeed the rock star and he runs for an even higher office, then suddenly it does become a little bit of a
I don't
circus
view him
act.
as a rock star at all. As a matter of fact, when Marcy Johnson brought him over to our house when he was running, I wasn't going to vote for either he or Ruth. He didn't appeal to me at all.
What changed your mind?
I thought I didn't. And I still, and this whole first year, I think he's really built a good, as you say, a brand. And I think he's done a great job this year. And if I were voting again, I would support him as a mayor. Mm-hmm. But I didn't think he did anything, and I don't think he'll have the appeal statewide that he has here, because he's built it here, and people like him, and it's a nice change from Cohen. But, you know.
Yeah, I think the voters statewide are smart and shrewd, and I think they usually always get it right. And, you know,
Always?
well, for the most part, I think, you know, they get it right. And, you know, if you get the mayor running statewide and you look at his resume, you know, he has a nice resume on paper, but it's brief. It's brief at FEMA. It's brief, you know, as mayor now. It was brief in Clinton's administration. It was brief, you know, as advance person for Senator Kerry. So I think, you know, you can really start putting some holes in that, as I think some of the mayoral candidates tried to do without success during the mayoral race.
But wouldn't he also be able to spin that the other way, which is that he did a job, did it well, and took the next natural step forward?
But he hasn't done it well yet.
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, the jury's still out here.
I hope he does it well.
In Newton.
But he hasn't done it well yet. That's what everyone's waiting for.
Right.
And the question is, as you've been raising the question, can he do both jobs? Implicitly, it's can he do both jobs well? And if he does the Newton mayor job well, that will help the Senate candidate job tremendously. But he's got to do it.
It's going to be 60% of his time to run for the U.S. Senate. Phone calls, advisor meetings, fundraising, traveling outside of the city limits. And I think it's, and I would like to, I would hope to see that he would say, this is my decision, I am running for the U.S. Senate, and, you know, better to serve Newton, I think that you deserve a full-time mayor, and I'm going to resign and pass the baton to the Alderman Lennon.
You know, in a sense, when the mayor is running for re-election, he's a candidate as well as running
Right,
the
and
city.
Martha Coakley didn't step down, and Mike Capilano didn't step down, and you know,
Right,
I think he keeps. I think he's entitled to keep his job.
Yeah,
But also, none of those people had only been in office for
Well, that's whether
only
that then
a year.
comes down
That
to
seems to be the rub.
But that comes down to whether he should do it or not.
Okay.
Not whether he should keep the other job. That's, I think, a different
that's
question.
that's certainly
Should he
vulnerable.
run or not? Because he's so new at it, that's certainly something that gives me pause.
And that's certainly a vulnerability of his, is that one of the knocks against him, if he ends up being the candidate, is that he has very little experience, and he's hardly been there long enough to have any accomplishments. Again, if he does or doesn't have accomplishments, but that will be a knock, a weakness of his.
So we're taping this program. I don't even know what today's date is
7th,
anymore. Around March 7th. So this will play for the next few weeks. So a month from now, as we get into by tax season, for example, by April 15th, we will in fact have an officially announced candidate in Mayor Setti Warren for Senate, or we won't at that point. What do you think, Colleen?
It sounds like he's in.
Jeff, what do you think?
I think he'll announce, yeah.
A month is about right.
Month's about right.
Well, you know, I mean, if you're going to run, then you want the theater of it. So we may have to think about the timing of when you.
So
make
this is
a
the
big
opening
announcement.
act right now.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say he would not have made a decision yet, and that he continues to feel like the buzz in the getting his name out there.
So then we can all follow this
depends
in
a
the
lot on-
tab and on the blog.
It depends
Yeah.
a lot on who else gets in or out and what their timing is. Right now, no one's really rushing to get in. So, you know, he doesn't have to do that. But at some point, you've got people that you're going to want to line up for support, whether they're donors or volunteers or campaign staff or whatever. And at some point, you have to send a signal to them so they know not to go to somebody else. So it depends on the timing with everybody else.
I think he'll want to announce it on the next edition of Newton Newsmakers.
And he's been on before. He'd be welcome to come back anytime. He was a terrific guest. All right. Jeff Seideman, Gloria Gavris, Colleen, Minaker, and Greg Reibman, thank you all for coming in. Newton Newsmakers will be right back with a couple of closing comments.
The Angels from the Attic are helping Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. Let's take a look.
There's lots to do.
We made signs, a stand, and now lemonade.
We're open for business.
Help others.
Get your lemonade.
We sold every drop.
To find out more, please get your parents' permission and visit our website.
And thank you.
Welcome back. Before we wrap up the program, I want to talk just for a second about Second Life Computers. And Jeff Seideman, you mentioned this at the beginning of the program. I wanted to give a chance just before we take off. Sounds like a wonderful program to find new uses or reuses for computers that folks were just going to be throwing away but are still somewhat useful. So what's the story with this?
Well, a couple of years ago, I had a couple of computers in the closet, and I was looking for a home for them. I brought them to Rumford Avenue, and I ended up just getting shredded. And so I wrote a column in the tab called Let's Find Homes for Closet Computers, because they were in the closet. When I did that, a woman named Marlene Archer, who used to run a similar program in a different city, said, hey, I'm in Newton, I want to do this. And so what we've done is we've set up a company along with Tom Sheff called Second Life Computers. People donate computers they're no longer using. They have to be Pentium 4 or faster. We take them, we reformat the hard drive, reinstall the operating system, put in OpenOffice, which is a free suite which is compatible with Microsoft Office, and sell them for a couple of $100, including monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and you've got a computer that's ready to go as fast as it was coming out of the factory.
So less than the landfill, reuse, low cost, and going to people who need them.
And donors get, of course, a tax write-off because we'll be tax exempt. So you effectively get $50 or $60 for a computer that otherwise would end up on the curb.
And I hear you're opening up an office at the Boys and Girls Club?
We have made arrangements for space at the Boys and Girls Club in exchange for working with those students there to teach them how to work with computers.
That's fantastic. Thank you. It sounds like a great
Thank
program,
you.
and I wanted to make sure you had a chance to talk about that.
Thank you, and hope the public, we have secondlifecomputers.org. We don't have the website up yet, but it soon will be.
Awesome. Jeff Seideman, thanks for coming. Thanks for your efforts around the city of Newton. And here's a closing comment for you. Believe it or not, the 2000 election season has begun. Later this year, Newton residents will be voting for alderman and school committee candidates, and already we know that there are a couple of contested school committee races with some really terrific candidates running. There will also, no doubt, be at least one or two contested alderman seats. Actually, I hope there are more than that. I hope there are many seats that are contested. Local elections usually have an absolutely horrible turnout, and it's not that people don't care. Usually, it's just most of them don't feel like it matters, or they don't know the people that are on the ballot, or some people just don't bother to show up. People forget that it's the school committee that oversees 65% or more of all city expenditures. They forget that it's the aldermen that decide if you should legally be required to shovel the city sidewalks, or if someone should be allowed to put a 10-room mansion next to your nice little colonial, and of course a whole host of other things. So this year, if you've ever thought about running for office, I suggest you do it. Go to City Hall, go to the elections office, take out nomination papers. It only takes 150 signatures and your name will be on the ballot. Make your voice heard loud and clear. Whether you're running or voting, get involved with the process. If you'd like more info on how to run for local office, or if you'd like to be supportive of my efforts to promote more transparency and some common sense ideas at all levels of government, please get in touch with me. My contact info is available at voteshapiro.org. That's voteshapiro.org. Thanks for watching. This program will be repeated throughout the month on New TV. It's also available online, on demand, in its entirety, 24/7 at newtonnewsmakers.org. I'm Charlie Shapiro. See you next time for another edition of Newton Newsmakers.
Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you.